Welcome to Davey's Take. Today we're talking about 28 Years Later, the third film in the 28 trilogy. You know, the movie with that fucking awesome trailer? You know the trailer.
11, 6, 5, Butch.
So yeah, 28 Years Later is the third film in this zombie trilogy. It was 28 days later, then 28 weeks later. They skipped months, so now it's 28 years later. But this time around, we have the same filmmakers from the first film. We have Danny Boyle directing 28 years later, and we also have Alex Garland writing the film. They both wrote and directed 28 Days Later. So I was excited to see what they would do coming back to a franchise they created and seeing a third film in a trilogy that I felt like it's been a long time coming that they're going to make a third film for this 28 series or franchise. So that was 28 Years Later. I think if you love 28 Days Later, you're going to love this film. This feels like a direct sequel to that, not from like a story standpoint, but from the style of filmmaking. This feels like a Danny Boyle film. This feels like a 28 Days Later film. And I'm not trying to say 28 Weeks Later doesn't have its moments where it feels like 28 Days Later. I actually like 28 Weeks Later, but you could tell it felt like someone was trying to sort of mimic that style that Danny Boyle has. And he has a style of filmmaking that's almost impossible to mimic. 28 Years Later, with Danny Boyle back, you can definitely tell that he has his fingerprints all over this movie. So I think like casual watchers who are just going into this movie thinking it's a normal zombie movie who maybe haven't seen the other 28 movies are going to be like, what the fuck did I just watch? Because there are a lot of sequences in here that are really out there. They're bizarre, the way they're edited, the way they're shot, but I actually love them. I think they really stand out from other sequences you would typically see in movies like this. But overall, I really like 28 Years Later. I think this is a worthy addition to this trilogy, and I think it's probably my second favorite in this trilogy. But I will say it's not going to be for everyone, for the reasons I just mentioned. I think some people might be a little put off by this movie because of some of the visuals, some of the choices, and some of the style of filmmaking. For me, that's one of the reasons why I think this movie really thrives. There's a sequence towards the beginning of the film where we have two characters kind of exploring on the mainland, and we are cutting back and forth from other visuals, and that Boots audio is in the background. And it was really a memorable sequence. It really was unsettling. It set the tone for this type of movie. It was suspenseful. But I don't think a normal filmmaker could have pulled off something like this. And also, speaking of the filmmaking, I read that this film was pretty much entirely shot on iPhones. I think it might have been entirely shot on iPhones, which is a nice little callback because I think the first film was filmed on like handheld camcorders or something. So when I first heard that, I was like, what the fuck is this movie gonna look like? But after watching this movie, there are some incredible visuals. There are some incredible shots. And in the back of my mind, I kept telling myself, I'm like, they're doing this with an iPhone. I know that there's probably some software they're using and there's way more equipment that they actually have. But some of the shots that they were pulling off with just a fucking iPhone was really impressive, and it looked beautiful. And I think that actually was a smart choice to make this movie with iPhones because there are some visuals in the way that it's edited and shot that fits well with the style that Danny Boyle's going for this film, and like he did back in 2002 with 28 Days Later. The quick cuts, the edits, the panic, the chaos, the anxiety, it's all there. It really feels like Danny Boyle did not miss a beat at all. And the story overall, I think, really works for this trilogy. I like how this trilogy has three separate stories that are happening in this world of the zombie apocalypse. And I love how this movie actually expands on some of the lore with this world and kind of explains what is going on. But back to the overall story, it's a very simple story that has a simple message with things that characters do that on surface level feel very basic, but there's deeper things that are going on. And then they put that in the middle of a zombie movie, which the more I think about is kind of brilliant. There are things that happen in this movie that people are really not going to expect. It's very different from your typical Hollywood blockbuster zombie movie. This feels more like an indie zombie horror movie at some points. Yes, there's things that happen that feel like your traditional zombie movie. There are some fucking gnarly kills in here. There's one where my jaw literally drops. So if you're wanting violence in this movie, you will not be disappointed. So overall, I just thought this was a really interesting experience, a really unique, interesting experience. But it's not perfect. There are things that didn't work for me, and I feel like it's not going to work for a lot of people. There are parts of the movie that definitely drag a little bit. It reminded me of some of the downtime in 28 Days Later, where I thought that movie dragged a little bit too. But I think 28 Days Later kind of condensed it a little bit better and kept the movie's pace going a little bit better. Here, it definitely brings the movie to a halt a little bit. I would say the second part of the film, or I would say like the third, fourth of the film, it definitely slows down. And then the ending, and I obviously won't spoil anything. I like how the overall story wraps up. But the last like 3 minutes were really bizarre. There's something that happens I can't really explain, and it was a lot of fun, but it almost felt like it was sort of forced because of something we saw in the beginning of the movie, and it also felt like it was almost setting something up for a sequel, which I'm pretty sure they're making a sequel to this. And that goes into another issue I had. There are parts of this movie where it does feel like some things are missing, or they're almost setting up for that next movie that hopefully happens. So yeah, there are some choices that didn't really work for me, but overall I think most of the choices in this movie really worked. It definitely outweighs those issues. This is a unique, bizarre, but interesting experience for a zombie movie. I can only imagine this is probably how a lot of people felt when they saw that first film in 2002. And that's what this film feels like. This feels like an actual companion piece to that movie. Not trying to say 28 Weeks Later doesn't either, but this truly feels like a sequel to the first movie. Because of that style of filmmaking from Danny Boyle, it really shines in this movie. I think there are a lot of great sequences and shots, and the fact that they use iPhones for those shots is really impressive, and there are some gorgeous things to look at. I will say that there are a couple of shots with the CGI that didn't look great, and I don't know if that's because of the iPhone or if they didn't really have that big of a budget. I don't really know. But there's one sequence in my mind that I think really stood out because it visually looked off. I get what they were trying to do, but it just didn't really look right. But other than that, I really love the visuals in this movie. There are some great things that you'll see. I think the story overall is very simple for a movie like this, but Danny Boyle and Alex Garland put their weird shit in it to make the experience more elevated. I think if you're going into this thinking it's just your typical zombie summer movie, you're gonna be really weirded out and you might be disappointed. But if you go into this knowing that this does feel like a sequel to 28 Days Later and you really love that film, I think you're gonna have a great time with this. I'm gonna give 28 Years Later 8 Davey Daves. I really want to see reactions to people when they see this kill I'm talking about. It was fucking gnarly. And there is some really weird but great shit in this movie too. So I'm excited to see what people think about it. So 28 Years Later, let me know what you guys thought of it once you've seen it. I'm curious to hear. And thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more Davey Dave's Takes.